Thank you, Margaret, and thank you to all of you for being here today in such a fantastic day, beautiful, sunny Bay Area. And also I want to thank you, Hilary Flynn, the program director of Crossroads Irish Festival, for this invitation. And let's celebrate the Irish in the Americas. And I put a title to my kind of conversation with you today, Take the Journey with Me. And I wanted to read you an Irish proverb that I like it very much because it's, in a way, the history of myself, the history of my family. The longest road out is the shortest road home. And so travel with me and let's go to Havana, Cuba, and to know a little bit about the Irish, the few Irish that went to Cuba, in particular to Havana. And I want you to know that on the left side of the entrance of the Havana harbor, there is a well-known fortress El Morro. Maybe many of you visit El Morro or heard about this historic Morro, and there is a lighthouse there, and the Morro has become an emblem of the Cuban, in a way, nationality somehow, and in particular of Havana. And in that lighthouse, you read O'Donnell. And so when you enter the Havana harbor, you find an Irish name. And that lighthouse was known for many years as O'Donnell Lighthouse. And who was this person, O'Donnell? And is the man that oversaw the project of the lighthouse in 1844, and he was a governor of Cuba from 1843 to 48, but he was a Spanish man of Irish origin and Irish ancestry, a descendant of the Calvaf O'Donnell, according to the chronicles, chieftain of the Tyrconnell. So we have this is interesting, this history of the Spanish and the Irish together, because historical, if we trace the history of Irish in Cuba, most of the Irish who went to Cuba in the 18th and 19th centuries arrived from Spain. Some of them with the Spanish royal armies, other Irish influx arrived from the US for the constructions of the railroads used to transport sugar cane to the sugar plantations. That was at the end of the 19th century, and then at the beginning of the 20th century. We talk 1902, 1910. Before O'Donnell, that I mentioned before, this man that gave the name to and he was very proud of the lighthouse, the Cubans offered hospitality to General Alejandro O'Reilly. That he's from the 18th century, and he was born in Ireland. He became a mercenary in the Spanish army and quickly rose through the ranks in the Spanish army, as I said before. In 1765, the Spanish crown sent Field Marshal Alejandro O'Reilly, or O'Reilly, like we pronounce the name, yeah, to Puerto Rico, and later on to Cuba, to form and organize the militia. He was appointed governor of colonial Louisiana, and he was a leader in the Spanish army later on. He arrived in New Orleans, the colonial capital, in August 1769, and took formal possession of Louisiana for Spain. We need to think that New Orleans and Cuba, in particular Havana, governors there were also in the in Cuba. So there was all this traveling from one city to another one. And it's funny because later on I got my PhD from Tulane University, and I remember going to the Irish Channel, and where I was trying to learn some Irish. And it's interesting because there is history connected to very important to the Irish in New Orleans. So descendants of the O'Reilly family, on Alejandro O'Reilly, have been in Cuba for many centuries. In today's Cuba, nobody remembers Alejandro O'Reilly, in spite that one of the most important streets, or main street, was named after him. It is the O'Reilly Street of La Calle O'Reilly, as I said before. Famous until the 50s for its banks, bookstores, world-class restaurants and cafes, O'Reilly Street was one of the favorite Havana streets of Edward Henry Caulfield de Pons, merchant, lawyer, and secretary of the Spanish Count of Fernandina, my grandfather, another Irishman feeling at home in Havana. There, at the busy corner of Mercaderes Street and O'Reilly, was the famous La Dominica, a cafe bakery owned by a Catalan. It was described by many foreigners, in particular British and Irish who lived in Havana at the time, as one of the best ordered and most elegant cafes in the world. Its large main entrance door led to a main lounge, and it was tightly packed with marble-top tables of different shapes, with a fantastic stone floor. And I saw it in the 50s. I was very little, but it still was there in the 50s. And have a fountain that all that water really produced a refreshing sound that drowned the patrons' loud conversations. But what made La Dominica famous, according to some foreigners and historians, was its ice creams of countless flavors and its icy cold fruit juices. Guava, guanabana, strawberry, raspberry, and peach and other flavored ice and ice creams were served according to an Irish traveler. And he wrote, that all these ice creams were served in an overgrown wine glass. On the plate under it lay a long brown coil, barquillo, looking like a cigar, tasting like a baked combination of brown sugar, well-beaten eggs, and flour. This is the sign, according to this traveler, as a spoon to eat the towering cream. They said, like, we used to eat these big ice creams in Cuba, no, with a lot of cream. Yes, and so that is interesting. Most of La Dominica patrons were male, but a few foreign women ventured into the famous establishment in the company of an appropriate escort. One of these women was my grandmother, Mercé Nena Jover Moynihan, and was there precisely in La Dominica, one of the best ordered and most elegant cafes in the world, located at the busy corner of Mercaderes, a street of Jewish merchants, and O'Reilly, a street named after an Irish general where my grandparents met. And so in my book, Ticket to Ride, I talk about my family history. I'm going to read more later, but after they married, I'm reading a little piece from the book. My grandparents were at the center of many fascinating things. I found myself at El Centro, their tertulias, their literary and musical gatherings, their house on Calle Mercaderes, and later on Calle Amargura in Old Havana, became a cultural crossroads where the traffic of foreigners created a new inspired geography. They traveled everywhere. My grandmother, Mercé Nena Jové, like in Catalan, Moynihan, played the piano and read poems, while Edward Henry Caulfield de Pons, besides playing the fiddle and the violin, behaved like an avant-garde composer moving around pieces of furniture. Most of the Irish who went to Havana in the 20s and 30s arrived from New York. Many of them were businessmen. John McEntee Bowman and Charles Francis Flynn were, according to the journalist John Moran, a dynamic duo that rescued the famous Havana Hotel Sevilla from dereliction in 1919. They also became a powerful real estate agents in Havana and constructed the Biltmore neighborhood that was located and is still located in the outskirts of Havana, where many Irish American families have homes. And when I said Irish Americans, I go back to the idea of Americas, no? And I would say Irish, Spanish Americans, Cubans, and French Irish, etc. And among them, my own family lived there. Other famous Irish American personalities at the time were, for example, in the news world, the E.F. O'Brien, the editor of the Times of Cuba. And in the Cuban Roman Catholic Church, Father Moynihan, no relationship with my grandmother, loved by the Cuban for its kindness and great sense of humor. Two of the most well-known Cuba jazz legends born in the 20s in Havana were of Irish descent. They were Frank Emilio Flynn Rodriguez, known only as Frank Emilio, composer and pianist. He was entirely blind by the age of 13, but learned Gershwin Rhapsody in Blue using Braille scores, and collaborated with many important Cuban musicians to produce the first Braille transcriptions of the music of the Cuban composer Ernesto Lecuona. He was also one of the major instrumentalists of the feeling, maybe many of you that are connected to Latin America remember the feeling sound of the 50s, a musical style that blended the Cuban bolero with the Latin sound. The second musician was Arturo Chico O'Farrill. Remember, in Cuba, we like always to put these little names to people, no? Chico, and I was called, my name is Carlota, but my auntie name was Charlotte, and they call me Carlotica, little Carlota. No, they like this thing. So Arturo Chico O'Farrill, he moved to New York City in 1948, where Benny Goodman hired him, and he became very famous in New York at the time. And he died in New York in 2001. And one of the pieces of my book, Ticket to Ride, is how many Cubans of Irish ancestry are there. Because this connects to my family, that's why I wanted to read it to you. In the 40s, my father moved to New York in search of his destiny. He learned to make brilliantine in blue, red, and golden colors to give a beautiful sheen to the hair. In his spare time, when he could break free from his alchemist captivity, he would go to listen to Cuban music at the Park Plaza Hotel in Manhattan. Those were happy times, and years later became a topic of conversation with me, always so curious about foreign lands and convinced early on that my father inhabited a magical world. A few days ago, while listening to a CD of Cuban blues by Chico O'Farrill, I remembered that in the New York of those stories of the mid-40s, Chico and my father had met at one of the Siboney Orchestra's concerts at the Club Cuba in Manhattan, and saw each other again in Havana in the mid-50s. The jam sessions of the terrace of Chico's house on D Street in Vedado, our neighborhood, became so famous that even my father, not particularly fond of Afro-Cuban jazz, couldn't resist dropping in once in a while at the much talk about terrace. I listened to the Rumba Abierta of Chico's Afro-Cuban jazz suite, and then I imagined Chico back in New York doing arrangements for Count Basie and Ringo Starr, and I see myself turning into a Beatles fan during my teenagers years in Havana. So that is why the title. So to give you a little bit idea about all this connection. So I was born in Havana in the mid-50s, and my memory have many sounds. The nomadic history of my family have given me a variety of experiences and languages. My memory is like an orgy of music. I learned from an early age to get up on my feet and dance. Looking at the photograph of myself, I saw a girl dancing an Irish dance. Eyes look at me from a seated audience that avoids crippling the music with a polite applause. My audience is curious and embodies all the mysteries of creation. My audience is my Irish, Catalan, Sephardic, Spanish, Cuban family. The eyes of my family activate the dance. But I was disoriented and forgot my steps, but I wanted the dance to continue. I grew up in Havana surrounded by Caulfields, Montouliers, O'Briens, Murphys, Dugans, O'Gormans, Colemans, Joves, and Fusters, all speaking Spanish. This was in the late 50s. My grandfather and my father, like many other Irish who went to Cuba during the past 3 centuries, became integrated into the Cuban society, and many use Spanish as their mother tongue. As a child, I was never able to pronounce certain words. I spent many solitary hours searching for words and places in dictionaries. My Spanish was not Cuban enough. My English was not Irish enough. My Catalan, only few words. Spanish was and is a privileged territory where I feel alive and well. My father grew up in New York and Havana and married a Cuban woman, my mother. All my family share their great love for Havana, a city they call home. But contrary to my family, I grew up dreaming with traveling and wanted to leave Havana for Dublin, where some of the most famous writers that I admire and keep admiring were born. And also dreaming of Paris, where my grandfather spent many important years of his life. Also, I want to move to my place. I don't know what was the name of that place. Every time people call me La Inglesita, the little English woman. Because in Cuba, in the Caribbean, they didn't make any difference. So all the Irish were English. And all the people from Asia were Chinese. All the Jews were called Polacos, Polish. And so that is interesting because the Irish were with the Spanish community in Cuba, but usually they didn't make the difference. So they call me, and they call my father El Inglés, the English guy. And so when they call me that, and when my name suffered many different spellings, later on in life, in the 70s, I had many identification cards with names like coffee that I didn't drink at the time. So I began drinking coffee later on. Names like Cofildo, Coffel, and Garfield. My favorite one that made me wonder if the bureaucrats at the ID office knew that I really love cats. Without my Garfield ID, I left Havana in 1981 and went to Zurich, Switzerland, a city linked also with the Irish literature thanks to James Joyce, that lived there in exile and is buried there in the Flunton Cemetery. My dancing there became a walking through the silence of the city, in order to quote Joyce from the portrait of the artist as a young man. And instead of people looking at me like my family did when I was a child, people began to ask me, "Where are you from?" I felt disoriented. Exile, imagination, and the changing perception of nature, religion's views, philosophical and political opinions, botanical knowledge, and idiomatic sounds, everything new. I asked myself many times for a specific reason why my Irish family went to Cuba. and began searching for the missing pieces of my family history in Cuban, Irish, British, and Catalan archive to discover that I had before me a fascinating family history of displacement and human interactions and transformations in various geographical settings. My book, Ticket to Ride, is a personal journey towards the past and the present. There is no one, but many places I belong to: Havana, Dublin, Mahon, Barcelona, and since the late 80s, the Bay Area. So thank you very much.
I'm going to do this in about 5 parts, so I hope you'll bear with me. First of all, I want to thank Crossroads for inviting me. It's a great pleasure for me to be here, and I want to thank in particular Professor McPeak and Hilary Flynn, who made this possible. I'm going to first read from Blood Fugues to sort of give you a small portrait of the protagonist in the novel. Kenny had the soft, delicate looks of his mother, a girl whose grandparents came to America from the severity of rural Ireland to the harshness of New York City in the 1890s, from Roscommon, family lore said. He was brought up quietly and respectfully by loving parents. His mother was Frances Ann Boyle, an Irish girl from the Bronx, whose family was unable or unwilling to escape to the suburban tranquility of 2 family houses and front yards in the outer boroughs of New York City. Instead, like other Irish families in their situation, they remained obstinately in neighborhoods like Hell's Kitchen, the Upper West Side, the South Bronx, and Inwood, touting apartment living as devoid of pretense. Most of the offspring of these families, detesting their condition, diligently sought a place in the middle class. Some struggled and failed. Most attained stability through service to the city. Others surpassed their assigned status and rose to positions of influence in many areas of the society, reaching as far as the U.S. Senate. Still others perished along the way, succumbing to the ills that all ghettos, in spite of their dubious romance, provide in abundance. Kenny's father was Tommy Romero, a Puerto Rican boy born in East Harlem, a different kind of ghetto that produced some successes, although its myth persists as a cradle to great accomplishments. Before he was 10, the Romero family took flight to the Williamsburg section of Brooklyn, known as Los Sures, because of the numbered streets, such as South 6 and South 7, which carried their direction. In time, the South Streets became Puerto Rican, displacing the Italians, who moved deeper into Brooklyn. The North Streets remained Polish, extending into Greenpoint. His parents purchased a house cheaply and over the years created a home that was a welcome place for their children and grandchildren. This haven was of such serenity that Kenny often felt the same respect and awe that he experienced when entering the fragrant solitude of a Catholic church, the incense replaced by the pungent aroma of his grandmother's cigars. A feminine peculiarity, to be sure, but a small matter compared to the delights of her kitchen, which produced generously confections of unequal flavor, whose smells dissipated that of the tobacco. Fleeing went the Irish, seeking refuge from the advancing Harlems, the dark skin of the people making unrecognizable the prejudices they had endured when they arrived in America. The defect of memory driving them forward to separate themselves from the shadows that follow all immigrants. Fleeing went the Puerto Ricans, escaping the same blackness, but impelled by the fears of blood, both physical and hereditary. fearing with greater horror the prospect of losing themselves in the anonymity that America forces on all of its people. Both groups fought the country's wish for that homogeneity that destroys language and culture. As an antidote to assimilation, they both retained fiercely their Irishness and their Puerto Ricanness. Each side of the family spoke of its ancestral homeland poetically, as if it had been the land of milk and honey. This stance was staunchly defended, even though the deprivation endured by hundreds of thousands like them had been immense for too many years and had forced them to leave their island homes. And yet, inflexibly, they remained branded in their hearts, the one with the green shamrock, and the other a red blood flower, a flamboyant. Each year, their pride celebrated by marching in pageants of ethnic excess. So that's the first part. And second part. The second part has to do with, having in front of you very odd-looking, sort of leprechaunish, Latino leprechaun. And as a matter of fact, in my novel that Margaret spoke about jazz, in it, Billy Farrell, who's one of the members of the very, very large number of characters, is a jazz pianist. And before he begins playing, a black leprechaun appears to him, Mr. McGinnis. So you can assume it's the ghost of Mr. McGinnis speaking. As Margaret said, in 1949, we came to the South Bronx, which was then an Irish neighborhood mostly. And I was kind of a spaced out kid, destined obviously to become a poet, which is just a thankless profession. So I became a novelist, almost as thankless. But I was this big already at 13 when I arrived. And I went out in the street. I was a pretty good roller skater. And the kids were amazed that this kid could roller skate so much. And they befriended me, And after a while, they recognized that I had some sort of athletic ability. And because I was so spaced out, they mistook it for like great courage. And, if they pushed me, I pushed them back, and it was just like a game. So they took to me and asked me to join the Shamrocks. And even changed my name from Ed Vega, to Eddie McVeigh. And this is how they passed me off, because most of the teams they played were other Irish kids. This was a regular football team. And so consequently, they listed me as Eddie McVeigh, and it was but it was great fun. And what happened, my friends were Jimmy Quinn and Johnny and Mikey Corcoran, Vinnie Rafferty, Patty O'Connor. And my siblings married McGlynn's and Sheedy's, and I almost married a Kathleen Finneran, but it didn't pan out, didn't work out. Mostly my fault. But anyway, I have a nephew, Sean Patrick McGlynn. And what happened to me was odd. I always questioned myself, because my writing about the Irish is really my writing about myself coming to the United States and coming in contact with the United States. So consequently, it always, my friends, my Puerto Rican friends naturally, some of my Irish friends, although they were more circumspect, always said, what are you doing writing about the Irish? I said, I'm writing about the United States. The Irish, in fact, are more interesting than the rest of the people in the United States. And they also are an island people for a long history, having to put up with colonialism, just as Puerto Rico is a colony of the United States. I also enjoy the fact that they have a facility with language, which I enjoy. And so consequently, I wondered why this attraction to the Irish. In 2004, the University of Puerto Rico asked me to come there and lecture and read. And I immediately called my favorite cousin, Sunchi Junque. Junque is a Catalan name. It's my mother's last name, and I use it as well as my father's name. And she said, what are you doing here? And I told her, and I said, please come to the reading. I have a book for you. And she came, and she said, my son is getting married tomorrow at the Caribbean Hilton. Could you please come? And I went. And then I hadn't seen her in 30 years. We were kids together. And after the wedding, there was a reception, and she introduced me to her daughters, very beautiful girls. And then I met the last one, very beautiful, green eyes. And she said, I want you to meet my sons. This is all this in Spanish, you know. So I said, sure. So she called these 3 boys over, about my complexion, with curly hair. And this is Barry, Brian, and Brady. You expect Jose Jimenez or something, you know. But anyway, I said, what's your last name? And she said, Murphy. I said, what? Murphy? She said, si, Murphy. It's very close to the way that the Irish pronounce Murphy, no? So I said, that's amazing. I said, did you marry a serviceman from the military person that came to Puerto Rico? She says, no. The family's been here since the 18th century. You know, the same with, you know. And I said, really? So we've begun tracing the thing. We still haven't found the actual person. But evidently it was an Irish conscript in the British Navy that came to Puerto Rico. Puerto Rico was owned by Britain, as, you know, they like to do with their colonies. And evidently this sailor came there and said, palm trees, warm weather, look at these girls. And he remained. And so that's my cousin's Murphy. That's the end of the second part. The third part is in response to the op-ed piece that Margaret McPeak wrote in the San Francisco Chronicle, and the letters. I don't know if you've read them. You should pick up the thing. The letters that a couple of, Irish Americans wrote in response, accusing Professor McPeak of not having a sense of humor, since the issue has to do with this T-shirts that Target has produced for the St. Patrick's Day Parade, in which Professor McPeak derided the fact that they were making fun of the Irish in the United States. You know, things like I survived the Kelly Murphy family gathering, things like that. And they wrote letters, poking fun at what I thought was a courageous op-ed piece. So this is in response to the Irish Americans who don't feel the pride that they should. And please excuse if I manhandle the Irish manner of speaking English. This is a joke told to me by one of my friends. He said that an Irish American was golfing with his wife on a weekend, and he hit the ball into the rough, went looking for it, and all of a sudden, a leprechaun jumped up. We're back in the leprechaun theme. He says, top of the morning to you, lad. And he says, what, you're a leprechaun? He says, yes, I am, and you have 3 wishes. 3 wishes? He says, yes. He says, what? He says, you have 3 wishes. He says, well, I want to be a park golfer. He says, no problem at all. From now on, pat and under. He says, I want a Porsche. He says, when you go home tonight, there'll be a Porsche in your garage. And he says, I want $1 million. He says, done. When you go to the bank on Monday, there'll be $1 million in your account. Oh, thank you very much. I have to find my ball. And so he goes, look. He says, hold on a minute, lad. Please, hold on. I says, I see you're golfing with your wife. Do you mind if I go into the shrubbery with her for an hour or so? And he said, yeah, let me ask her. It's $1 million. I mean, so he goes up and asks the wife, and she says, what? He says, you don't mind if I go in the bushes with the leprechaun? I mean, he says, no, go ahead, It's $1 million. I mean, She says, well, I don't care about the car, but $1 million is something that, we could help. Could help us a lot. So she goes into the bushes with the leprechaun. About an hour later, they're coming out. And she's smoothing her skirt and fixing her hair. And the leprechaun says, Madam, thank you very much. How old is your husband? And she says, he's 44. He's a little too old to be believing in leprechauns, isn't he? So that's for them who don't respect their own heritage.
So in addition to that idea of the crossroads of identity and the politics of identity, the other thing that I had wanted to speak about for a second was the crossroads of community building. I've been fortunate enough with my experiences, which have all been in the San Francisco Bay Area, to have the ability to go and to listen to a lot of different music and to perform, to go and to listen. And I can't say enough what events like this do for younger people like myself who are having to negotiate this idea of a dual identity and the pressures of that dual identity to be able to come and to hear people. I can remember way back going to the Irish Arts Festival that used to be out at Fort Mason, right? Going out to the Irish Arts Festival, and in the same day, being able to hear Donald Lunny, being able to hear Keela, and being able to hear Andrew McNamara in the Lahans. It was a history lesson in a day. It was a sonic history lesson in a day. And the best thing was that you could ask, and you could talk to any of the people who were there, and you could have that history lesson expanded for you. Right? Being able to interact with folks like photographer Kieran Ridge, who is sitting in the audience right now, being able to interact with Calm playing on his album, Bridge Across the Blue. Right? These events I really don't think can be taken lightly. For urban American Indians, we have powwow. We have our powwows. And powwows are intertribal events that revolve around a shared repertoire of songs and dances, so like some of the singing that you've heard me do here today. It's a time for people to be able to come together, not for the casinos, not for that part. I mean, that's a stereotype, talking about fighting stereotypes, right? That's a stereotype for us. Yes, we have those casinos, but is that all of our culture? No. It's not all we are here to be defined by, right? For most people, especially in urban areas, powwows are places to go to reconnect. Powwows are places to go to see people that you haven't seen in a long time, right? And to make new friends, right? To make new connections. It's nothing different than what's going on here. It's nothing different than what was going on out at the old festival at Fort Mason. And so with that, I wanted to play also for you a little bit of cedar flute. The cedar flute, today, most of you probably, if you've heard cedar flute, you've heard Mary Youngblood, or you've heard R. Carlos Nakai. And cedar flute has really become emblematic of American Indian in the singular, American Indian culture. I wanted to play it for you today, give you an example of what might be considered a traditional style, because after this, I would like to bring up two guests and would like to play some arrangements that were created especially for this festival that bring in both the Irish American and the urban Indian. So this is a cedar flute song for you. So now that you have a little bit of powwow and a little bit of cedar flute in your ears, I would like to invite two guests up to perform for you two arrangements which I made especially for today. First, Rita Lindahl. Rita and I are both in the same cohort at the ethnomusicology program in UC Berkeley. Come on. And we've been saying for 4 years, we need to play music, and so we finally made it happen. So Rita Lindahl. And then Masaru Koga. Mas and I have been playing together for a very long time, so much so that we wore the same shirt without having to talk to each other about it. Mas is in high demand both as a teacher and as a session sideman, having played with everybody from Anthony Brown's Asian American Orchestra to Wayne Wallace's newest CD. Who haven't you played with lately? Yeah, I mean, he's played with everybody. So you can find Mas on a lot of different CDs from the local Bay Area jazz community. This first song that we're going to do is an air called The Brown-Haired Girl. When I was fortunate enough to be able to record with Colin and Perini on Bridge Across the Blue, I, at that point, was telling Colin, oh man, I got this air. I got it off Chieftain's album, and I'm going to do it on the electric bass. And he looked at me and he said, you're nuts. Your people are going to go crazy, but if you can do it, I'll help you. And he gave me this book of airs, and he said, look, here it is. Okay, figure it out, figure it out, figure it out. And it never quite gelled on the bass, and that's another album, I guess. But with Hillary called about today, and I started to think more about the cedar flute. And I said, I wonder if this particular air can fit. And, well, here we go. Thank you very much. I guess what I want to say about an arrangement like that is that it's not meant to simply use the cedar flute as a bit of exotica or the air as a bit of exotica. It's meant to try and sonically address what the other wonderful authors on the panel today have been speaking about, what they write about. It's the use of all of this together is a way of trying to address those identity politics through sound. And hopefully not in a way that homogenizes anything, hopefully not in a way that takes away from the uniqueness of any of the traditions that are incorporated within it. We all come from jazz backgrounds. We all come from jazz backgrounds, which is inherently about mixing in and of itself. But if you let that start to become homogenized, if you let that become blank, then I think you begin to suffer from this idea of cultural invisibility. You know, who is who and what is what. I don't want to lose that in the music. Just in the same way that, as the authors before me have so eloquently spoken, they're not trying to lose that in their work. You know, and that's what I try to do when I put these songs together. And with that, I would like to give you our second arrangement and last song. I was taught Powell singing. We tune because we care. I was taught how to sing by a man named Dr. Barney Honer, who's the great-grandson of Chief John Grass from Standing Rock Reservation in South Dakota. And one of the songs that he gave me before he passed on Indigenous Peoples Day, 1995, was a song called what he called the Blue Horse Special. And the Blue Horse Special is a song that I have been fortunate enough to be able to play in a lot of different performance contexts. It's a song that was made by a man named Matthew Tubols, a very well-respected elder whose wife, Nellie, just recently passed on. Both of them were renowned for their singing and song-making skills. And when I thought about doing another arrangement for today, the Blue Horse Special immediately came to mind. And just as I thought to myself, oh boy, I wonder if I can bring a cedar flute into a reel, I thought, God, I wonder if I can bring the cedar flute into an air. I said, God, I wonder if I can bring a powwow song and do it like a reel. And I played around with it, and this is what happened. What I'll do after I tune, because I care too, what I'll do is I'll sing you the original powwow song so you can hear that, and then we're going to go into an arrangement that also includes a little something at the end for my grandmother.